So I decided to focus my project on authentic leadership. The reason when doing so is when I originally read the text, I thought that this sounded really great. I thought that authentic leadership would encompass varying individuals who had varying social locations, varying social identities, and it would almost give leeway to these this idea of authenticity would give way to acceptance and really focusing on those individuals and their authenticity. However, with our discussion, I realized that everything seemed quite nice on the surface, yet when you began to look at things further and really digest what the text was saying, there are so many faults within the system um, that you can't ignore it, and it's kind of funny how great this theory sounds, yet you just want to rip the paper to shreds because it doesn't seem, it's not a good theory. Um, so I laugh specifically because there is no unifying definition for authentic leadership. However, it is very influential. How that possibly can be astounds me because, or I guess it astounds me because it goes to show you the value that dominant norms and the dominant group plays within society, because this applies directly to dominant norms and the dominant group within society. Because with no unifying definition, that means that there's no framework to build this theory off of. There is no way to measure what makes someone authentic or not. So that means it's up to the leader. And this is a very leader-centric theory, which is also, as Dugan points out, I find this hilarious that it's leader-centric, but it's also, Dugan points out on Tube 58, that it's pro-social. My fault with the problem that I see within that alone is that it's almost contradicting, because how can this be a pro-social theory if it does not focus, if it solely focuses on the leader? I think focusing on the leader is very important. However, the follower needs to be equally represented, because you can't just focus on one and not the other. With that being said, I'm not going to focus on the definition behind authentic leadership, which we talked about in discussion specifically about, this idea of being authentic is the person that you are, that is most reflective over all different kinds of situations, and there's many faults within that alone. But I want to focus solely on this idea of what it is, relating authenticity and the leader itself. So, when looking at the 4 elements that Dugan points out and takes from Kernus and Goldman in their text from 2006, it sounds really great on the surface. I will reiterate that constantly, I feel like, throughout this video, but it sounds awesome. This whole idea of awareness, knowing who you are, what you're good at, what you're not good at, unbiased processing, being objective, behavior, the idea of doing, almost not being fake and being true to who you are, and then relational orientation of being open and honest with the people that you're communicating with. However, as you look past it, you see that it's solely focused on the leader, and that is the biggest fault that I see within authentic leadership. So one, the whole idea of awareness. The question is posed, how do others perceive you? It's not about what others, how you perceive others, it's about yourself as a leader. The whole idea of unbiased processing, what happens when the leader is biased, or is biased and doesn't even know it? There's faults within that. How do you go about correcting that? Third is behavior, which is a huge problem to me, because behavior is the idea of doing an action that reflects your thoughts. What happens if you are racist, or you're sexist, or you're prejudiced, or you value others to a certain degree, or you're homophobic? yet it's almost like your actions or comments or remarks are justified because you're being authentic to yourself, even if that is offensive to others. And that definitely plays into hegemonic norms, the whole idea of stacks of knowledge, and social location, and how identifying with dominant identities create a huge problem. Like I said, it all sounds really great on the surface, but when you look further, there's multiple problems within this theory. So, as I just said, the problem is that it is too leader centric, and ultimately, any views, actions, remarks, comments can be regarded as okay if the leader truly believes these things because the leader is being authentic. And that's a huge problem. And it's almost like authentic leadership justifies um, rude, racist remarks, anything that's subjectifies one group over another. And that's not right. That's a huge fault within this. What happens when, there's varying social locations, or the dominant group is actually in charge? So I just wanted to quickly point out, Dugan on page 263 states that from Bamford, Wong, and Latchinger, that findings link authentic leadership enactment by leaders to outcomes such as increased teamwork, trust, group performance, follower satisfaction, and engagement, and organizational citizenship behaviors. And I just wonder how that possibly is. It just seems unreal to me. But when we go to deconstruct this theory, I focused on two tools using ideologic critique and willful blindness. When focusing on ideological critique, I what are the underlying core beliefs, and the idea that authenticity can justify virtually anything as long as one is being true to themselves. That seems like an overwhelming problem that is stated, or that I found. And, underlying core beliefs represent the dominant norm, the dominant group within society. How can others be authentic if the dominant group has biases towards others, especially with dominating norms? We look at, people who are homophobic. How can they authentically be themselves if the leader in charge identifies completely differently or has dominant norms? This idea of authentic leadership makes it okay for basically dominant norms to continue and persist. And then this idea of willful blindness, I think it's definitely a huge contender for deconstructing this theory. This idea of justification falling into hegemonic norms, and it's okay, but it's not, because but it comes off that way. And there's huge faults within why people are purposely remain unaware, don't do things, and it's because they have the power to do so. And authentic leadership allows people to be true, even if they're rude, or they are against different minorities. So when looking at reconstruction, I focused on cultivating agency and building interest convergence. Like I said, on the surface level, I thought authenticity sounded like this was a way for people to truly be authentic versions of themselves, regardless of whether they held dominant or non-dominant identities or social locations. I thought it sounded very utopian, and kind of getting away from that. The goal is to be your true self and tie in the individual more, um, and recognize that oppression can definitely occur within this um, theory. And then cultivating agency positions the development of personal and collective efficacy essential to the purpose of leadership. Not just focusing on the leader solely, but bringing, enunciating this idea of development and how this is an ongoing process. And, you can't just accept you for who you are. Leader included, that, they need to grow, they need to recognize biases that they have. Um, and in doing so, I think that this could definitely address the faults within authentic leadership by, this focusing on this idea of developing and allowing for others to be true versions of themselves. So, yeah.